In May 2017, a mother and her 15-year-old son vanished.
A disappearance is not unusual in the world of crime. Every year, countless people go missing, and most are eventually found, whether alive or deceased. But some disappearances leave behind such a chilling void that even hardened investigators, people trained to confront violence, deception, and tragedy, admit to being unsettled. This is one of those cases. A mother and her young son did not simply vanish into thin air. They seemed to be erased in an instant. The evidence was strange, the timeline made no sense, and the deeper the police looked, the more disturbing the case became. This story is not just about a missing person report. It is about a vanishing that defies logic. A quiet suburban neighborhood turned into the setting for a nightmare that still raises questions to this day. When police officers, men and women who have seen the worst that humanity can offer, begin to whisper among themselves that a case feels unnatural, you know you are dealing with something extraordinary. Imagine this: a warm spring afternoon, children playing in their yards, neighbors mowing their lawns, and the hum of daily life filling the air. In a house on a peaceful street, a mother is seen carrying groceries inside with her son following close behind. Minutes later, the home is silent. No screaming, no sound of forced entry, no broken glass. When family members arrive only hours later, the house is empty. The groceries are still on the kitchen counter, the front door is unlocked, and both mother and child are gone. Not a trace of them has ever been found. This is the case of Melissa Carter and her 7-year-old son Daniel. A case that has haunted their community for more than 2 decades. And as you will hear, this disappearance does not follow the rules of typical missing persons. There are details here that disturbed even the lead detectives. Some called it the one case they wished they had never been assigned. Before we walk through the timeline, think about something what is more terrifying than violence. It is silence. A crime scene without signs of a crime. A disappearance without clues. That is the kind of mystery we are about to uncover. The timeline of the disappearance on the morning of May 14, 2002. Melissa Carter followed her usual routine. She was 32 years old, a single mother raising her only son, Daniel, in the town of Ridgewood. A small but tight-knit community where everyone seemed to know everyone else. She was described as friendly but private, someone who waved to neighbors but did not share much about her personal life. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office in town, and Daniel was a cheerful boy who loved soccer and comic books. That Tuesday morning, Melissa left work early. She told her co-workers that Daniel had a school half-day and she wanted to spend the afternoon with him. Security cameras showed her leaving the office at 11:45 a.m. sharp. She picked Daniel up from school at noon. Teachers later said nothing seemed unusual. Melissa smiled as she signed him out, and Daniel was carrying his backpack and lunchbox, excited to be going home early. The last confirmed sighting came just after 12:30 p.m. A neighbor, Mrs. Patel, who lived across the street, saw Melissa carrying grocery bags from her car into the house, while Daniel skipped behind her. The groceries were later found on the kitchen counter, still in their bags, suggesting she never finished unpacking them. That detail became one of the central mysteries of the case. By 3:00 p.m., Melissa's sister, Karen, arrived at the house. They had plans to meet for coffee, but when Melissa did not answer her calls, Karen drove over. What she found immediately unsettled her. The front door was unlocked. The groceries were still out. Daniel's backpack was lying near the living room sofa. But the house was silent. Melissa's purse and keys were on the table. Her car was parked in the driveway, and even Daniel's favorite shoes were by the door. Karen searched the house, calling out their names, but there was no response. No sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken windows. Just emptiness. She called the police at 3:27 p.m. The police arrived when Ridgewood police officers entered the home. They were struck by the eerie stillness. Missing person reports usually involve some kind of clue. Footprints outside, a note, or a neighbor who heard shouting. Here, there was nothing. Everything appeared normal, yet the mother and son had vanished. The first theory was that Melissa had taken Daniel out for an errand and would return shortly. But her car was still in the driveway, and her wallet was inside. Investigators ruled out a voluntary trip. The second theory was abduction, but there were no signs of forced entry. No neighbors reported seeing a strange car or hearing anything unusual. By nightfall, the case had already begun to disturb the responding officers. Detective Raymond Holt, who later gave interviews about the case, admitted that from the very beginning, something felt wrong. He said, "It is one thing when someone runs away, It is another when someone is taken, but when they are simply gone, without a sound, without a trace, that is when it unsettles you. Police brought in search dogs. The dogs tracked Melissa and Daniel's scent through the house, but the trail stopped at the back door, which led to the yard. Beyond the yard was a row of trees and a small walking path that connected to the neighborhood. Strangely, the dogs lost the scent just a few feet beyond the backyard. It was as if Melissa and Daniel had stepped outside and disappeared into the air. The investigation expands. By the following morning, Ridgewood police had already escalated the case to a top priority. In most situations, a missing persons report requires 24 to 48 hours before being treated as urgent. Adults are often believed to have left voluntarily, and many missing children are found after a custody dispute or simple miscommunication. But in this situation, the circumstances were far too unusual. A mother and her young child were gone without explanation, with her car, wallet, and phone left behind. It was not only suspicious, it was alarming. Detectives mobilized immediately. Teams were assigned to different tasks, canvassing the neighborhood, reviewing security footage, and analyzing every item left inside the house. Officers went door to door asking residents if anyone had seen or heard anything between noon and 3:00 p.m. That was the crucial window when Melissa and her son Daniel had vanished. The answers were eerily consistent. Not a single neighbor reported unusual activity. No one heard a scream. No one saw a struggle. No cars were seen speeding away. Ridgewood was a quiet town where people often worked from home or watched their children play outside. Many residents were at home during the day, yet nobody witnessed Melissa or Daniel leave after 12:30 p.m. The silence was unsettling, and the absence of witnesses raised a chilling possibility. Whatever happened, it was quick, silent, and executed with precision. The first step was to check surveillance footage. The gas station at the corner of Maple Avenue and Ridgewood Lane had a security camera. Investigators pulled the tape and confirmed that Melissa's car had passed earlier in the day when she returned from grocery shopping and walked toward her home. But after that, nothing. No suspicious vehicles appeared on the recording. No strangers were caught on camera. Investigators requested additional footage from traffic cameras on nearby roads. These cameras had helped solve previous cases in Ridgewood by tracking cars moving in and out of neighborhoods. But this time, there was nothing. No cars matching the description of an abductor's vehicle. No signs of Melissa's car leaving the driveway. It was as though the world had simply swallowed them. Strange details. What unsettled investigators the most were the small, haunting details. Inside the house, groceries sat untouched on the kitchen counter, still in their plastic bags. Perishable items, like milk and vegetables, were left unrefrigerated, spoiling slowly as time passed. This detail suggested Melissa had been interrupted immediately upon entering the house. The front door, found unlocked, raised more questions. Did Melissa forget to lock it, distracted by the groceries and her son? Or had someone walked in after she arrived, taking advantage of a brief moment of vulnerability? Daniel's backpack was another clue. It rested neatly on the sofa in the living room. The position of the bag suggested he had entered the house, set it down, and prepared to relax after school. It gave the impression that mother and son had made it inside safely, if only for a moment. But one detail disturbed investigators most of all: Melissa's cell phone. In 2002, mobile phones were not as advanced as they are today, but Melissa always carried hers. It was found on the kitchen counter unused, after she returned home. Phone records revealed no suspicious calls, no text messages, and no emergency attempts. If she had been in danger, why had she not reached for the phone? Did someone prevent her? Or did she never have the chance? Investigators widened their search into Melissa's personal life. Coworkers were interviewed at the dental office, where she worked as a receptionist. Everyone described her as polite, reliable, and cheerful. She had mentioned no threats, no unusual fears, no sudden changes in behavior. Family members told police the same story. Melissa was cautious, not reckless. She did not have enemies. There were no reports of an abusive ex-partner. She was not entangled in legal disputes or custody battles. Her financial records showed no signs of debt or secret accounts. She appeared to be a normal single mother, living an ordinary life. And yet, she was gone. Police fear and whispered theories behind closed doors. Some officers admitted to feeling spooked. Detectives are trained to deal with violence, theft, and murder. These crimes, while horrific, usually leave evidence: bloodstains, fingerprints, broken locks, and eyewitnesses. This case left nothing. Veteran investigator Raymond Holt described the atmosphere in the Ridgewood police station during the first week as, naturally tense. He said the silence inside the evidence room felt heavier each day. Officers who had worked homicide for decades confessed privately that this disappearance unsettled them more than bloody crime scenes. It was not the presence of violence that disturbed them, it was the absence of it. No struggle, no noise, no ransom note. The working theory was abduction. But how could someone abduct a mother and child in the middle of the day from a residential neighborhood without anyone noticing? And why leave behind the most obvious evidence, like her car, wallet and phone? As days turned into weeks, the search intensified. Police expanded their radius, searching wooded areas, nearby lakes, and abandoned buildings. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning with thermal cameras. Search dogs were brought in repeatedly, but their trails ended near the backyard path, fading into nothingness. Volunteers joined the efforts, combing through fields and riverbanks. Missing posters were taped on every lamppost, in every store window, and on community bulletin boards. The town rallied, determined to bring them home, but nothing surfaced. No clothing, no belongings, no bodies. Theories take shape with no physical evidence. Detectives were forced to rely on theories. Some began to wonder if Melissa had planned her own disappearance. But how could she have left without a car, without her wallet, without money, and with a small child in tow? That theory collapsed under its own weight. Others speculated about organized crime. Perhaps Melissa had stumbled into something she was never meant to see. But no links were found. She had no criminal ties, no debts, and no suspicious associates. Human trafficking was another possibility. Early 2000s America was beginning to acknowledge the quiet rise of trafficking rings operating in suburbs, preying on vulnerable individuals. Could Melissa and Daniel have been lured outside by someone they trusted, only to vanish into a network that left no trace? Some even whispered darker, more bizarre theories. Cult involvement, a stalker hiding in plain sight, or a predator who had planned the abduction meticulously down to every detail. But none of these theories produced tangible evidence. A growing sense of dread, as weeks became months, a sense of dread grew in Ridgewood. Families who once felt safe in their quiet town now locked their doors at all hours. Parents refused to let children play outside unsupervised. The disappearance of Melissa and Daniel was not just an unsolved case. It was a shadow cast across the entire community. For the police, the case became a wound that refused to heal. Officers continued to follow leads, but each one ended the same way: nowhere. Veteran detectives admitted they could not shake the feeling that this case was different from anything they had ever seen. Even years later, some described it as the one investigation that haunted them most. It was not simply the tragedy of a mother and son disappearing. It was the silence, the lack of answers, and the chilling possibility that whoever was responsible had walked away untouched. Strange leads that went nowhere. As the second week of the investigation began, the Ridgewood Police Department hoped desperately for a breakthrough. When Melissa and Daniel Carter first vanished, the case had been labeled unusual, but not impossible. Detectives believed that with enough manpower, canvassing, and community support, someone would eventually come forward with a solid lead. After all, people do not simply disappear in the middle of a suburban neighborhood without leaving some trace. But as time went on, it became painfully clear that every clue seemed to crumble upon closer inspection. The first major tip came from a man traveling along Interstate 72, about 30 miles from Ridgewood. He contacted authorities claiming that he had seen Melissa and Daniel at a rest stop near the highway. He insisted that he recognized them immediately from the missing posters, and he described Melissa's clothing and Daniel's height in convincing detail. For a moment, hope surged. Detectives rushed to the rest stop, combing through security footage from the gas station, the diner, and the surrounding parking lot. They interviewed employees and truck drivers who had been there that day. Hours turned into days of careful review, but no sign of Melissa or Daniel ever surfaced. The man who made the report seemed sincere, but investigators could not ignore the possibility that he had been mistaken, or worse, that he had fabricated the story for attention. False tips are not uncommon in missing persons cases, and each one costs valuable resources. Still, the lead was thoroughly checked, and once again, the trail ended in silence. A second lead seemed even more promising. A teenage boy in the neighborhood told detectives he had noticed a white van parked near Melissa's street around the time of her disappearance. He described it as dirty, with tinted windows and no visible license plate. White vans had long been associated in the public imagination with abductions, and the detail could not be ignored. Detectives dug into local vehicle registrations, questioning delivery drivers and service workers. They even set up checkpoints to stop and question drivers of similar vans. But despite weeks of effort, they never located the vehicle described by the boy. Was it a figment of his imagination, a trick of memory, or had the van truly been there, connected to the crime? The uncertainty was maddening. Perhaps the most disturbing lead of all came from a woman who lived near the wooded path behind Melissa's backyard. While walking her dog on the afternoon of May 14, she claimed she heard what sounded like a child's laughter. It was brief, followed by sudden silence. At the time, she thought nothing of it. Children often played in that area, and the sound of laughter was common. But after hearing of the disappearance later that day, the memory gnawed at her. Could it have been Daniel? Was that moment of laughter the last trace of him anyone would ever hear? Police scoured the path again and again. They sent search dogs down the trail, combed through brush, and even drained a nearby pond. Yet nothing was ever found. No footprints, no dropped items, no fibers, no clothing. The lead, like all the others, withered away into nothingness. The dead ends, every potential clue, seemed to collapse under scrutiny, leaving detectives with a growing sense of frustration. Melissa's phone records revealed nothing unusual. There were no late night calls, no unknown numbers, and no emergency attempts on the afternoon she vanished. Her financial records were equally clean. No sudden withdrawals, no secret transactions, no signs of a hidden plan to leave town. Her computer was carefully searched. Investigators looked for emails, messages, or internet searches that might reveal fear, a secret relationship, or a planned disappearance. But her online activity showed nothing beyond routine tasks, a mother checking her son's school updates, paying bills, and ordering household items. Detectives even entertained the theory of a random home invasion gone wrong. Perhaps someone had entered the unlocked house and encountered Melissa and Daniel unexpectedly. But this theory quickly fell apart. Nothing in the home was stolen. Jewelry sat untouched in her bedroom. Cash remained in her wallet. There was no forced entry, no broken locks, and no signs of violence. If an intruder had been there, how had they managed to subdue both Melissa and Daniel so quickly, without leaving evidence or alerting the neighbors? Weeks stretched into months, and the investigation began to stall. For the community, fear transformed into something deeper, unease. Parents who once allowed their children to ride bikes freely now kept them indoors. Neighborhood watch groups sprang up overnight. Strangers were regarded with suspicion. Grocery stores, schools, and parks buzzed with whispered theories, each one darker than the last. And through it all, police admitted privately that they were shaken. It was not just the lack of answers. It was the way the answers seemed to evaporate the moment you reached for them. Theories that haunted investigators. By late summer, the official case file contained hundreds of pages of interviews, reports, and dead ends. But at its core, three theories dominated the minds of investigators. The first was abduction by someone Melissa knew. Perhaps a friend, co-worker, or casual acquaintance had taken advantage of her trust. Maybe this person had entered the unlocked door or convinced her to step outside, leading both her and Daniel into danger. But no one in Melissa's life raised suspicion. Background checks revealed no criminal histories, no hidden motives, and no enemies lurking in the shadows. The second was a carefully planned kidnapping by strangers. The mysterious white van still lingered in the back of everyone's mind. Could it have been a vehicle used by professionals who had stalked Melissa, waiting for the perfect opportunity? This theory fit the eerie precision of the disappearance, but without a trace of evidence, it remained speculation. The third was the most unsettling of all. That Melissa and Daniel had walked willingly out of their home with someone they trusted, only to vanish forever. Perhaps a familiar face had appeared at the door, offering help or asking for a favor. Perhaps Melissa had felt safe enough to step outside. But if so, who was this person? And how had they managed to disappear without leaving even a hint of their presence? Detective Holt later admitted in an interview, "We kept circling the same facts, and they made less sense each time. It is rare for police officers to say they are afraid of a case, but this one kept us awake at night." Police fear and silence. Law enforcement officers are trained to deal with evidence, with patterns, and with human behavior. Crimes follow logic, even when they seem chaotic, but this case broke the rules. The missing groceries, the unlocked door, the sudden stop of the scent trail, and the absence of struggle. All of it suggested something quick, clean, and almost impossible. Some officers, off the record, whispered about paranormal possibilities, ideas they would never put in an official report. The notion was dismissed publicly, but privately. A few admitted they could not shake the feeling that the case defied explanation. Others believed it was the work of a highly skilled abductor, someone who had planned every detail and executed it flawlessly. But no matter which angle they pursued, the truth remained hidden. Months slipped into years, leads dried up. Families moved away from Ridgewood, unable to live under the shadow of the mystery. Eventually, the case grew cold. But unlike other cold cases that fade quietly into files and archives, this one left a scar. Retired officers later admitted that it was the only case file they never wanted to reopen, the only one that made them feel powerless. Because sometimes it is not just what you find that haunts you, it is what you cannot explain. Years later, the case that refused to die. By 2007, 5 long years had passed since the mysterious disappearance of Melissa and Daniel Carter. For many outside the small town of Ridgewood, the case had become just another entry in the long list of unsolved mysteries. The missing posters had faded from lampposts, rain and wind wearing them down until they were little more than scraps of paper. News coverage had dwindled as other stories took the headlines, and the wider world seemed to move on. But inside the Ridgewood Police Department, the case file never collected dust. Detectives rotated in and out over the years, but everyone who reopened that folder described the same uneasy feeling. Officers who prided themselves on rational thinking and methodical investigation admitted privately that this file felt different. The notes were familiar: times, dates, leads, theories, but none of it added up. It was a puzzle with missing pieces, a crime that seemed to defy explanation. Then, in 2010, hope flickered briefly. A woman in another state contacted authorities, claiming she had seen a boy who looked strikingly like Daniel at a shopping mall. By then, Daniel would have been 15 years old. She described him as nervous, glancing around, as if searching for a way out. The boy was accompanied by an older man who seemed controlling, keeping a tight hand on his shoulder. The woman insisted the resemblance was uncanny, and that she felt something was terribly wrong. Detectives treated the tip with urgency. They traveled across state lines, reviewed mall security footage, and interviewed employees in nearby stores. For a moment, it felt as if the mystery might finally break. But the surveillance cameras offered no clear image of the boy, and no further witnesses came forward. The tip, like so many before it, fizzled out, leaving only frustration behind. Still, this small spark reignited public interest. Local and national news stations revisited the case, airing new specials and documentaries about unsolved disappearances. Ridgewood residents were interviewed once more, their voices tinged with the same grief and confusion that had never really left. And once again, the same haunting questions resurfaced. How could 2 people vanish so completely in the middle of the day? Why was there not a single credible lead after all this time? The community's long shadow even today. People in Ridgewood speak of Melissa and Daniel with a kind of hushed reverence, as if their names belonged to a story too heavy to say out loud. Their old house has changed hands more than once, but neighbors claim it never feels right. Some say the air around it feels colder, others say they avoid walking too close. For many, it stands as a physical reminder of the day innocence left Ridgewood. Some families moved away after the disappearance, unable to bear the weight of the mystery. Others stayed but changed the way they lived. Parents began telling their children to be cautious, not because of a visible danger they could point to, but because of the memory of what had happened. It is one thing when crime comes with warning signs. It is another when it arrives quietly, without sound or struggle, leaving behind no trace at all. The disappearance did more than take a mother and her son. It stole something larger, Ridgewood's sense of safety. Doors that were once left unlocked are now bolted shut. Neighbors who once trusted each other now double-check security cameras and outdoor lights. The town that once prided itself on being peaceful and safe now carries an invisible scar, and that scar is the memory of Melissa and Daniel. Theories that still linger with no arrests and no bodies. The case remains open, but theories abound. One theory is human trafficking. Advocates point out that the early 2000s saw an increase in organized trafficking rings operating quietly in suburban areas. The lack of evidence in Melissa's home could suggest that she and Daniel were lured into leaving with someone who appeared trustworthy, only to be taken elsewhere. Another theory is that Melissa may have known something she never revealed, perhaps involving someone dangerous. But her family rejects this, insisting she lived a simple, quiet life. There are even those who believe Melissa staged her own disappearance, perhaps to escape pressures she never shared. But again, the lack of resources, no wallet, no car, no plan, makes this nearly impossible. And then there is the chilling possibility that the abduction was random, carried out by someone who was skilled enough to leave no trace. If that is true, then the person responsible may still be out there. Why police still whisper about this case? It is rare for law enforcement to admit fear, but behind closed doors, this case earned a reputation. Some officers called it the Ridgewood vanishing. Others simply referred to it as the one that keeps you up at night. What terrified them was not just the crime itself, but the total absence of answers. Crimes usually leave something behind: DNA, footprints, fibers, fingerprints, or a witness. Here, there was none. Investigators described it as if Melissa and Daniel had walked out of reality itself. Even FBI profilers, who were later consulted, struggled to form a psychological profile. How do you analyze a crime with no crime scene? How do you study a suspect who left no evidence of existence? Closing reflection: 2 decades have now passed. Melissa's parents are gone, having never learned what happened to their daughter and grandson. Daniel would be in his late 20s if alive today. His childhood ended the moment he walked into that house with his mother, never to be seen again. There are hundreds of unsolved disappearances across the world, but few carry the same weight as this one. It is not only the loss of 2 innocent lives, but the silence of it, the strangeness, and the way it unsettled even the police who investigated it. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the most frightening crimes are not the ones filled with violence and noise, but the ones cloaked in quietness. Crimes where people simply vanish, leaving behind only questions. And so the case of Melissa and Daniel Carter remains open, frozen in time. A mother and son, erased in an instant. A disappearance that even scares the police.